How do I learn C# well? What order should I learn it in? Are there other topics that I should learn after I learn the basics? What can I do with C#? If you've ever asked any of these questions, please know you're not alone. I get these questions often. And as we move into 2023, these questions are coming up more and more as people plan out their coming year and how they want to improve as a developer. In this video, I'm going to walk you through what you could be as a C# developer, what order to learn the various C# topics in, what your learning cycle should look like, and some tips and tricks for learning C# well as how you can do all of this as easily as possible. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and I've been a software developer for over 2 decades. I'm a self-taught developer who struggled through all of the dead ends, missteps, and conflicting information in my journey to really understanding how to be a great software developer. Now I spend my time trying to make it easier for others. This video is just one of many resources that I have to offer. Here on YouTube, I have almost 500 videos around C#, including 3 full courses for free. I also have other free resources, as well as my paid courses on my website, iamtimcorey.com. If you want to be prepared for the real world as a software developer, I can help. Now, in this video, we're going to look at specifically how to learn C#. But just so you know, this is not the only video I'll create this year for how to learn topics. There'll be others for the web, for a number of other topics. So if it's not quite what you're looking for, don't worry. There are more coming out soon. I would encourage you to stay subscribed to this channel so you get alerted when the new ones come out. All right, so let's talk first about potential outcomes. It's always important to understand before you get into learning a language or learning anything really, what the outcome could be or what you could start moving towards. And this is one of the reasons why I love C#. Because as a potentially new developer or a developer who's saying, I need to really improve my C# skills, you need to know, what can I do with it? And I want to go through this list quickly, and I'll come back and really look at why I love C# so much. So you can be a desktop app developer. You can be a web app developer. You can be a mobile app developer. You can be a back-end developer or a front-end developer. You can be a full-stack developer. You can develop for Windows, Mac, or Linux. You can develop for iOS or Android. You could even develop for the cloud. And so you look at that list and say, okay, what can't you do? And that's why I love C#, because when you learn C#, you're not limiting your options. You're not saying, well, I'm only ever going to work on front-end web, or I'm only ever going to work on this. Now, I want to be very clear here. When you learn a programming language, you're going to learn the syntax, but really what the important part is practicing your logic skills, your ability to put things together. Because as a developer, you may switch languages. You may end up somewhere you didn't expect, and that's okay. But the key thing is that you get a great foundation and a broad scope in one language. Because once you do that, then you have this array of knowledge to pull from and experience that you can build upon. And then if you want to change languages, or if you want to add in a language or supplement with something else, that's okay. And that will really help you, because even though you learn in, say, C#, you can use those same skills in JavaScript or in, web frameworks or whatever you're going to be doing, because you have that knowledge of this is how a program should work. This is how it should be built. You'll have that experience. So when you're learning C#, you're keeping your options open, because you may start off thinking, hey, I want to be a web developer. And then you get halfway down the path and realize, I'm just not good at this, or I really actually like this other part. No problem. You haven't lost anything. Your skills are still there. You can use the same language and do something else. So when you're looking at C#, this is why I love it, because it keeps your options open. So let's talk through what a good learning order should be. Now, this is going to be generalized, because when it comes to learning, there's a lot of different ways to get to the end goal. But I'm going to try and give you a good foundational, big picture idea of this is how you should learn C#. Okay. I've done this for for decades. I've taught this for over a decade. And this is a lot of, honed skill over a lifetime of learning how to best learn things in order that makes sense. So let's start with the basics. C# syntax. And you may say, well, Tim, isn't that everything? And the answer is absolutely not. When I taught C# in a classroom, I was usually done most of my syntax teaching in week 5 out of 16. Because really, the important part is not learning how to create an if statement. I mean, it's important to know that, but the important part is learning when to use it. And that comes from building that logic skill up, practice, actually creating things. So the syntax, which is, variables and if and for loops and do loops and, those things that are the basics of creating an application. The basics of a syntax is the first thing you should learn. Now, after that, the next thing up is debugging. And I know you may say, well, Tim, you've got that pretty prominent thing right there. Is it really that important? And the answer is, oh my goodness, yes. Because you're not perfect, I'm not perfect. We don't write perfect applications the first time you build them. And so a lot of what your job will be as a developer is figuring out what went wrong. That's, I heard one person or a number of people say that being a software developer is kind of like being a detective in a murder case where you're also the murderer. Okay, you created the problem and now you got to figure out where you did it. Okay, because when you write software, you're going to create bugs. And so practicing debugging, learning the skills, learning the tools and how to use them effectively to track down issues is super important. That's why when I teach C#, I teach you the basics of the syntax and immediately jump into, okay, now here's how to debug. And then we'll get back to doing more syntax, but you need to understand how to figure out where the bug is, how to track it down, and that does even take practice. We'll get back to practice in a bit, but it's important to really learn how to debug early on. After that, this is a huge category. Object-oriented programming is things like classes and instantiation and inheritance and interfaces, and the list goes on. And you'll even get a lot of buzzwords in there. That's the thing that's kind of unfortunate, really. I'm not a big fan of using the big buzzwords because of the fact that they sound kind of scary. Because it's almost like it's another language that keeps you out. You're not the cool kid because you don't know how to use polymorphism or what it means. And so, that can be a little bit limiting, but don't get intimidated. The big thing here is to practice these things. Learn them in the proper order. Don't try and jump into delegates before you've learned about instantiation. This is why, if you look at my list here, we haven't talked about user interfaces yet. For example, we haven't talked about, are you going to be a Forms developer or a web developer? Are you going to do desktop or mobile or web or whatever? Don't go there yet, because all those user interfaces, whether it's WinForms or WPF or UWP or ASP.NET Core, MVC, Razor Pages, Blazor, all those use object-oriented programming and use them pretty heavily, and some advanced stuff like delegates and events and inheritance and interfaces. And if you don't already have a good foundation in object-oriented programming, then you won't understand how they actually work. And so it becomes magic. And when the magic breaks, you don't know what to do. So I would encourage you to focus in on learning object-oriented programming first. Now, if you're starting to already glaze over and say, man, that's a lot of stuff to learn, and I'm not even sure where to start, don't worry, we'll get there. But next up is on top of this, and this is in order here. So the next thing up is desktop project types. And you may say, Tim, I want to be a web developer. Cool. Learn desktop project types. It's important to learn that. Learn about the console app and WinForms and WPF at least. Learn how to build these things. It does not have to be an in-depth knowledge. You don't have to be an expert in them, but learn how they work. There's a number of reasons why this is important. One of them is because there are times when a desktop application is the better choice. For example, if you want to automate something, don't create a web application. You create a console application. Then you can throw it into Windows Task Scheduler, or you can put it on a server and have it run in the background as a service. There's a number of reasons why that's really beneficial. So learn this enough to at least have a passing knowledge of those project types. If you go to csharpprojects.com, CSHARP projects.com, I have a web page that breaks down all the different project types in their categories: desktop, web, mobile, gaming, and other. And I have introductions to every one of the project types for free, YouTube videos for free, as well as videos that go over the category and what the different things are in the category. Use that because you want to at least have a good foundation in this. It makes you a more rounded developer. And again, you may think, I want to be a web developer. And then you get into the web and go, I don't want to be a web developer. Having an understanding of the other project types will give you the opportunity to say, you know what, I kind of like doing whatever it is that you figured out, and maybe you lean more into that. Okay, next up, ASP.NET Core. That's a big category. Even though it's tiny, don't ignore the size. It's a big category. It covers 5 different project types. We've got API and Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly, Razor Pages, and MVC. And you should at least have experience in all of those. And again, if you're saying, Tim, I want to be a desktop developer. Yep, still learn these. Because as a desktop developer, you should know how to build an API because it will be very important for a lot of cases. Okay? And there are times when the web application is the right call. So it's important to learn. Okay. Now, next up, data access. You should know how to get data into your application and back out, because that's really what applications are. They're a way to get information in and a way to take information back out. That's really the whole purpose of an application. If you think about it, when, pick any application besides a game, but even then you could argue it's the same thing. But pick any application, you think about it, what's its real purpose? Well, it's to, I put information into it and I get information back out of it. It may crunch the numbers, it may do some work on the data, whatever, but it's still really there to do those 2 things. And so you have to store the data somewhere. And knowing how to store data in not just one place, but multiple. Meaning, don't just learn SQL. Even though SQL is probably the most common database for C# applications, especially in the business world, you should still know more than that. You should know SQLite and MySQL and Cosmos DB and MongoDB and talking to APIs and so on. So you should know data access. And then this one right here, I put it down at this level because I think it's that important, and that is dependency injection. So with ASP.NET Core, dependency injection is built in. With all the other .NET Core project types, console, WinForm, WPF, it's still available, but it's not pre-configured for you. So it's still there and still usable, and you should know how to integrate it and how to use it, but it's important that you do. It's important you know how to use dependency injection. It really is one of the best ways to decouple your applications, to make them more testable, to make them more easy to upgrade and replace, and just make better overall applications. So I encourage you to learn about dependency injection. Next up, HTML and CSS. And again, you may say, Tim, I don't want to be a web developer. Cool. You should at least understand HTML and CSS, the basics. But I would encourage you here. There's lots of resources for HTML and CSS, but lots of them are out of date. You want to learn about HTML5 and CSS3 because these are the modern web. Things have changed a lot. One of the old jokes, and I'll probably do a video on it sometime soon, is, centering a div is so hard. Well, guess what? It's not. It's, quite frankly, super easy, and you have multiple choices now that are very easy to do and do well. So learning modern web is important. And it's not just important to learn, okay, I put a div on a page. And that's not good enough because, when the web first came out, we were all concentrating on people who could see, people who weren't colorblind, and people who could read a small font size. And, as the web has matured and grown, we've realized that not everyone fits in those categories. And so we need to make the web more accessible. And knowing how to do that well is important. So learn that stuff. Again, even if you're not going to be a web developer, knowing how to at least do the basics in those categories will be really important to making you more marketable and a better overall developer. Same thing is true. The next one, JavaScript. You don't have to learn all of JavaScript. And notice here, when I say JavaScript, I am not saying Angular, React, or Vue. I think they've done a real disservice to the community in the fact that people think that's what we mean when we say JavaScript. You need to learn what's called vanilla JavaScript, the basics of actual just writing JavaScript without a framework around it. Because, again, just writing small little things can be super helpful in certain circumstances. So again, if you don't know a web developer, no problem. You should still know a little bit, okay? And so this fourth line right here are things you should probably dabble in until there's certain things you're like, yeah, I want to go deeper in that area. But at least dabble in them. Azure. You should at least dabble in it. And if you want to say, you know what, Tim, I want to go with AWS instead. Cool, go for it. But either way, learn a cloud. Okay. And again, you don't have to go deep in this, but you should know what's available and how to use it. Because I can tell you that the cloud can be super cheap when it comes to supporting your business. I worked at a company where they were paying thousands of dollars for essentially one server. And it was one server that was hosted somewhere else and backed up and all the rest at a web host. It was not a cloud server. It was just, they own the entire server. And actually, I think they had a couple of them. And we moved everything, all of our services, over to Azure. We went crazy making it scalable. We made huge databases that were super scalable. We made our websites globally available and scalable, and we increased uptime. We set up backup systems in a different zone, and we did all of it for cheaper than that one server. Now, you can spend a lot of money in the cloud as well. But if you do it right and understand at least the basics, you can make some wise choices to make some very, very cost-effective decisions about whether you host it locally, host it on a web host that's just a normal web host, or you host it in the cloud. So knowing what's available at least gives you the opportunity to make the best decision for you. Next up, Docker. I think that every developer should know Docker. They should know the basics of using Docker, consuming Docker containers, and creating Docker images. Now, it may be that you don't want to be a web developer. You don't want to work in the cloud. You don't want to work on microservices. No problem. Those are all great uses for Docker. However, if you want to be a local desktop developer, no problem. Docker is still going to be super helpful. So I encourage you to learn it and know it. Again, this is all in order. So if you're not through debugging yet, don't start learning Docker. Start with C# syntax and then go to debugging. Do it in order. Okay. SQL. Again, this is one database. I would encourage you to learn it. I would encourage you to know it. If you're going to choose one database to learn, choose SQL. However, I would encourage you not to stop there. This is kind of a stand-in for databases. So start with SQL, but then learn MySQL and learn MongoDB and so on. But start with SQL. And then finally, Git. You should know version control, specifically Git. Don't get teased into, oh, we're going to learn TFS, or we're going to learn, some other version control system, learn Git, because Git has established itself as the number one version control system by far. So if you want to be marketable, learn Git. Okay, so that's the learning order. Now at top row, choose in any order you want. Okay, you don't have to decide that you have to learn Git last. You can learn Git first. You can order it however works for you. The second row down, so desktop project types, web project types, data access, and dependency injection, you can learn those in pretty much any order you want as well. So if you decide I want to learn ASP.NET Core first, I want to be a web developer, cool, go there first, but just don't stop there. Okay, learn the others as well. But this is the general order I recommend learning C# in. So when you're learning C#, you're not going to be in just C#. You'll have to learn other things, as you see in this chart, but start with the core of C#, learn it really well. All right, so let's jump in now to the learning steps, or the learning cycle, as I like to call it. The steps that you take when learning anything. Okay, so when you're learning C#, I want you to start with learning a small topic or item. Okay, and we're going to see some examples of this in just a minute, but focus on one thing at a time. We're going to use an example of learning an if statement and learning how if works, and that's all you learn right then. That's a topic unto itself. You wouldn't learn if statements and for loops and for each and no, just learn if, then learn for each. But start with a small topic or item and then practice. This is so important. I tell people that really you haven't learned a topic until you've done it, and really done it more than once. So practice the basics next. It's important that you don't just skip over this. This is where, over 2 decades of experience, learning the hard way, doing things the wrong way sometimes, making mistakes. This is what I've learned, okay, is that I will think that I've learned something, that I've read about it, or I've seen it done. And I say, I've got this. I understand it. I see the syntax. I understand the syntax. And no big deal. I've got this. And I move on. The problem is that bites you in the butt more often than you want to know about, okay? You need to actually practice it so you understand and you validate that what the person showed you actually works, and that you understand how it works. So practice the basics and then practice the edge cases. And I'll show you how to do this in the next couple of slides. But after that, repeat. Okay, so one topic and then practice at least twice. I say 2 to 5 practice projects, because if you figure something out, you want to try it again. If you have to back up and do it a few more times, you write it out and go, oh, that didn't work, and then you tweak some things until it does work. Do it again, because you'll make sure that you can do it right the first time, not hopefully tweak it until you kind of get it right, because then you start to not really trust it. All right, so let's look at this as an example. So here's a basic if practice, okay? So this is what I mean by practice. This is the entire application. And this is what's mind-blowing to people. People say, well, Tim, I don't know what to practice. And my answer is always, practice just what you learned. Don't try to make something real. Just put enough code in to try out what you're learning. And this is a great example because of the fact that you can see string name equals Tim on line 1. I have hard coded Tim in there. Okay. And then I say, if name equals Tim, then say hello, Tim. Well, it's always going to say hello, Tim, because it's hard coded. And you might say, well, that's bad programming. You should ask for a name. Nope. We're not going to do that because we're not practicing asking for names. We're not practicing filling in variables from a console read line. We're not practicing anything else but the if. So I'd run this application, make sure that it says hello, Tim. And then I'd go back and I'd change that to say Sue instead of name equals Tim. And I would run it again and make sure it says hello, other person. because I want to make sure that the if works, that it works the way I expect it to, and that the else works and it works the way I expected it to. And that's a basic example. That's all you need to do. Just make sure you understand how an if and else works. But remember I said I want you to practice it again with edge cases. This is what an edge case example of my practice for if would look like. So it's a little more complex. We've got first name and last name, but again, they're hard-coded. And I'm checking if first name equals Tim and last name equals Corey. You see, I'm testing out how an and works, making sure if you type AND, it doesn't work. Well, testing the fact that you remember it's 2 ampersands. And you're like, oh, got it. That's how it works. And then I'm testing, the else if, where first name equals Tim. You might say, wait. You've already checked for first name equals Tim. Yeah, I did, but I checked for first name equals Tim and last name equals Corey. So I'm validating that I understand how the fallout works. So if the first one is false, then the second one, it could be true for the part of a statement, not the whole statement. So in the first and line 4, if it was Tim Smith, it would say false. But on line 8, it would say true because the first name is Tim. And so it would say, nice to meet you, another Tim. And if that was not true, if it was Tom Corey, we go down to line 12 and go, oh, last name is Corey, so therefore it's going to say, are you related? And then if it's Sue Storm, then we're going to go to line 18 and say, hello, other person. So I've tested out if, I've tested out else if, I've tested out the 2 checks with an and in between. And I've tested out the fact that the and truly does not allow the true statement to be true if one of those is false. So I'm testing out the edge cases. I'd probably do some more testing in here with or statements and make it a little more complicated and make sure I understand. Because you want to validate and verify that you really understand how an if statement works. You want to make sure that you understand the syntax, that you understand the logic behind it, and you understand how to use it in various ways. I can tell you that if you do this, if you go through and do the basic example and the edge case example, and I encourage you create separate applications. These are console applications, really quick to create. But by doing that, you can separate these out and make sure you understand, don't have leftover stuff from the last test. But if you try this out and you validate it, you will have a much better understanding than if you just watched it. And in fact, you'll figure out that you missed things when you watched it. And you'll figure out, oh, I missed that detail, like the and. You know what? People miss it all the time. They'll put 1 ampersand, or they'll put AND, or something else, and they'll go, wait, that wasn't right. What do I do? Or they'll do first name equals with 1 equals Tim, and it doesn't work quite right. It'll work right for the if, but not for the else, because it does an assignment. And so stuff like that, you need to figure out by doing it. But not only will you solidify what you've learned and figure out any places where you might have missed in the video or might have just kind of skipped over in your brain and didn't really catch that piece, but also you can even go further and go deeper than just what the video or tutorial showed you. You can actually figure out new things by trying things. Like what happens if you say first name equals Tim and last name equals Corey, or last name equals Smith? Is it Tim Smith? Would that work? Or would Tom Smith also still work or not? And you figure out where the ands and the ors and how they work and which one takes precedence. And, can you group them? And can you use parentheses to group them? And how would you do that? You can try these things out to figure out how to really use this really well. And all of a sudden, you have learned more than even the tutorial taught you. And you become even better as a developer. But not only this. By doing this, if you save this example, you now have an example in your own logic and thought process that shows off how to use this topic. That way, when you go to actually use, again, we're going to use if as a simple example. If you go to use if in a real application, you have an example to look back at to say, wait, how did that work? What was an and? What was an or? You have your own example to look back at. It's like documentation for what you've learned. So I would highly encourage you, if you learn nothing else, learn to practice, and this is how to do it. Okay, so let's jump into some tips and tricks that I have for learning C#. So I'm getting these all at once. Practice isn't extra, it's essential. Okay, so when you go to practice, make sure that you practice. Don't just say, oh, that's extra, I can skip over it. It's not extra, it's essential. Number 2, don't get distracted by flashy project types. This is a common occurrence. I hear people tell me, well, I started to learn that, but then I really want to learn MVC. So I'm going to start learning MVC. And they get into MVC and they're like, oh, I actually want to learn React. And so I start doing React. Okay, stop. You're getting distracted by flashy things. And you know what? Those flashy things will distract you only long enough for you to kind of give up on what you've done before. And then once you start bogging down in those, you get distracted by something else that's flashy. Take the time, follow the path, learn one thing well. I would encourage you to learn C# really well because it keeps your options open. But once you get through it, you can have a list, keep a list of the flashy things you want to learn, and then pick one and learn that one next, as long as it makes it into an order that makes sense. But if you jump from thing to thing to thing, it will really hinder or even eliminate your ability to be a software developer. I've seen a lot of people bounce around for years and never really become a software developer because they just don't have the discipline to stick with it long enough for it to complete their education. Don't be like that. I want you to complete your education. I want you to become a software developer, not just talk about it. Okay? And number 3, stick to the plan. Learn in order. Kind of goes to number 2, but stick to the plan. When you set up a plan, stick with it, go through it. Don't bounce around. Don't give up halfway through because it gets hard. It's going to get hard. Okay? And sometimes it can be really hard. But as a software developer, you're going to have hard days too. You can do this. You absolutely can do this. And yes, some people will say, oh, not everyone can do this. The number one thing I have found that makes a good software developer is a person who will stick with it. Not a person who is born that way, not a person who has a gift. No, the person that says, yes, I don't know what I'm doing. Yes, I'm struggling. Yes, it's difficult, but I can do this. I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to keep trying. Just keep trying. Take one small step at a time. You will get there. All right? So stick to the plan and learn in order. Number 4, this is very important, especially as we start into 2023 and start into the new year and get the excitement of something new and the excitement of learning C# for the first time or learning it more deeply. Pace yourself. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. So when you look at the year ahead and look at, oh, I want to learn C#, don't try to cram it all in the first week. If you have the week off, don't say, you know what, I'm going to spend 40 hours learning C#. You would get through a lot, but you know what? You'll also burn yourself out. And you'll get so exhausted you don't want to see it again. And so you'll take some time off, and that one day off becomes 2 days, becomes a week, becomes a month, you just never get back to it. Okay? Instead, set some time on your schedule. Plan for 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, and say, I'm going to do this every Thursday at 7 p.m. Or I'm going to do this every Saturday at 8 a.m. Put a time on the schedule. Block it out in your calendar and say, this is my time to do C#. Okay? And pace yourself. Say, I'm going to follow a path. I'm not going to get distracted. I'm not going to sprint. I'm going to take my time, go through this, and I'm going to accomplish the goal in 6 months or in a year or in 2 years. But plan it out. And then number 5, evaluate your progress and continually improve it. So I want you to take some time and look back. So if you get a month in or 3 months in, take some time, take the time you have already scheduled. And instead of learning C#, I want you to look back at what you've learned. Look at how you've learned it. See how well you've retained it. See what areas you've kind of messed up in, what areas you kind of missed in, and see how you can get back on track or how you can learn better or retain better and practice, try some different things and evaluate your progress and continue to improve. But with that, don't be hard on yourself. Figure out how to, it's happened, it's done. If you missed a month, if you didn't retain anything, don't just get down on yourself. Accept what can't be changed. And then figure out, this is how I'm going to change for the future so that doesn't happen again. Okay? And move forward. All right. So that's my tips and tricks. Next up, I've got the easy path. Now, before we get started here, I do want to point out one thing, and that is the easiest path for you isn't going to be free. And that's just, it is what it is. I use all the funds that I get to help fund all the free content that I do, including this video. And I got lots of free stuff, and there is a way to do it just by watching YouTube videos and tutorials online. And the path that I've already given you, you can follow that for free. But I spent a lot of time. I spent 5 years in a classroom learning how to boil this down into the easiest path possible in order to get you from point A to point B as fast and as efficient as possible. And so I've got some resources that'll help you out if that works for you. If it doesn't, no problem, right? And just one quick side note, if you're watching this video in the first part of the year, the All Access Pass monthly is open, which is the cheapest way to get all this stuff. But there's also the All Access Pass annual. It's always open. Or, you can buy these courses individually. But the first one, and this is one right here, the C# Master Course, if you look back at the path that I laid out, the first 3 rows of things are all covered in the C# Master Course. It covers the first 3 entire rows. So the C# Master Course is over 70 hours of content. It's got a ton of stuff in it. And it's designed to take you from I know nothing to I am a real world ready developer. So it starts you with, let's install Visual Studio and figure out which options to choose and why. All the way through object-oriented programming, debugging, creating 2 full applications, data access, the different user interface types, and so much more. Now, I will say that if you buy the C# Master Course instead of doing the rental through the All Access Pass, if you buy it, it does come with a course called the Year of Coding. And what it's designed to do is just what I talked about earlier when it comes to pacing yourself and setting up a plan for what to learn when and how to schedule it out and looking back over your progress and evaluating your progress and so many other things. And so it sets up an entire year that starts when you purchase the course, and it gives you a weekly email with a weekly content on a course that says, okay, here's what to learn. Here's some information about it. Here's some, stories about my life and about how this, how I learned this was important, or how I, kind of messed this one up and how you can avoid that. So I would encourage you, there's lots of bonuses in that if you purchase it, but that's a big one. Now, these other courses, I do not encourage you to buy everything. If you go the All Access Pass version, then you have all the courses that I'm going to listen here. But this is for, maybe you're through the C# Master Course type content, whether you did it on your own or whether you went to the actual course. Remember, there's that whole top row full of stuff that you need to evaluate when to learn as a C# developer. Well, I have Git from start to finish. You need to learn Git, that's the way to do it. SQL databases from start to finish. If you want to be a SQL developer, that's the way of doing it. .NET Core dependency injection from start to finish. Learning dependency injection is super important. It's built right into .NET Core. Here's how to use it, not just in the web projects, but also desktop projects. .NET Core app settings. Now, this one is an interesting one because people often look at app settings and think that's super simple. You just put stuff in there, you get it out. It's way deeper than that. Out of the box, you get 5 different locations to pull settings from. And you can add more, and we'll show you how to do that, including pulling it from the cloud and pulling it from like Azure Key Vault. So app settings are really important. We cover user secrets and so much more there. Azure from start to finish. This is one that I encourage anybody that's ever looking at the cloud, especially Azure, to look at this course. I spent a lot of time learning Azure, learning how to do it right, how to avoid some pretty expensive pitfalls. And so I create a course that teaches you how to use a lot of the major services that you'll need as a C# developer, but also how to do so without breaking the bank. We talk about money a lot in this course. We talk about how to get stuff for free, how to get stuff for the least amount possible. We do a bunch of stuff in this course, and even if I were to pay out of pocket, I show you how to get some free credits to start. But even if we were to pay out of pocket for everything I did in this course, and I left some stuff running overnight and so on, it was going to be less than $5 I would have had to pay if I didn't have the $150 in free credit. So I show you how to manage your money really well. I show you how to monitor it, how to test things out and get rid of them fully without having something kind of lingering out there. You may have heard horror stories, especially from AWS, of people who just tried something out with a tutorial and got a $1,000 bill or $10,000 bill the next month. And I show you how to avoid even coming close to that. We make sure that everything is going to be free for you and that you don't get stuck with a bill you don't understand. So Azure from start to finish. I have a C# Prove It bundle. So these are practice projects. And this is not just the practice like I show you with the if statements. These are more like after you've learned a few things, these help you kind of evaluate, did I really learn that? And kind of put some things together. We have C# basics, we have some web types, and we have some algorithms and data structures, and we have a full project to do as well, where I give you a challenge. I say, hey, do this. And you get to figure out, hey, can I do this? And you try it out. But then you can come back for the next video, which is, and here's a solution that I would do. So you get to see, hey, can I prove to myself that I can do this? Can I prove that I've really learned this? It's always good to evaluate your skills in a real context where you're given a trial and say, hey, can you do this? Because when it comes to going to a job, that's all a job is even if you get into the job, even if you pass all the interviews and get to the job, your boss is going to say, hey, do this, prove it. And if you can't prove it, if you can't do the job, then you don't keep the job. So being able to prove it in a test environment is a great way to make sure that you validate your skills. And then I have this whole series called the Tymco Retail Manager. Now, you can find this entire series on YouTube. So you can look at that and say, hey, I want to buy this because I want the source code, which is no longer on Patreon. I want to buy it because I want to have all the videos in order. I want to buy it because I want to have offline access and stuff like that. Cool, go for it. But you can also go to the YouTube channel and look for this. It's a playlist on its own, and you can go through the entire thing, and everything is done on screen. So you can watch what I do on screen and do the exact same thing and get all this course code yourself by building it up. And I would actually encourage you to do that because typing it back out, making sure that yours work the same way mine does is really helpful. So that's the 8 courses that I have that could be helpful. And I call it the easy path because instead of you kind of piecing things out here and there, this allows you to kind of just let me do it for you. I'll show you, here's what to do, here's how to do it, here's your next step. So it's not something everyone can do. And you know what? I don't encourage everyone to do it. I encourage those who can afford it. This is a great way to invest in yourself, but it's also a great way to support all the free stuff that allows everyone to learn C#, not just those who can afford it. So if you can't afford it, please do not push to afford it. Okay. I had got a ton of resources on the YouTube channel for free. You can also go to iamtimcorey.com and go to the resources tab, and there's a whole bunch more free resources. You can go to docs.com, DOCS.com. It's Microsoft documentation site with lots more free resources. Take the information I showed you with the learning path and say, okay, I need to learn object-oriented programming. Let's figure out what Tim has, what Microsoft has, what other resources have, and learn it that way. Okay, you not have to pay a penny. But if you want the easiest way to do it, there you go. All right, so that's how to really learn C# in 2023. You can do it in a year, you can do it in less than a year. But I would encourage you to make sure you treat it like a marathon. Don't get distracted. But this is a great way to make 2023 really count and make sure that you are in a much better place as a developer, a much better place in the job market at the end of 2023. I wish you the best of success. I hope to see you move through this. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments and let me know, where you're starting and hopefully where you're going to end up. All right. Thanks for listening. And as always, I am Tim Corey.